Okay.
Is this recording?
This is recording. It's May 6th, and we're at the Alton VFW Post 1308 in Alton, Illinois, and we're speaking to John Rain, who is a Battle of the Bulge veteran, which he will tell us about. How old are you?
84.
Okay, and where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
I was in college at Columbia, Missouri.
At the university?
Yes.
And what year were you then?
1941.
What year in college?
Freshman.
You were a freshman?
Yes.
Did you finish college, or did you enlist then?
I wanted to enlist, and my folks said, your brother enlisted, so you can't. So I waited to be drafted in March of 1943.
Okay. Did you continue to go to school then while you waited?
Yes.
Okay. And then once you were drafted, basic training, where did you go?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
And you were in the 106th
Infantry Division.
And like some of the other guys around here, you all went to the same place then for the training?
Yes.
And then to be shipped overseas, what happened?
When I was shipped over?
Yeah.
They shipped us, we got off at Liverpool, I believe, and took a train down to somewhere in southern England, and we were just there for 2 weeks and got issue of new trucks and our same old radios. I was a radio operator. Same old radios and a lot of same old stuff, and then we drove down to the coast and got an LST and went across to France and went up the river to Rouen, and when we were in the United States, we had I was rode in a Jeep with a lieutenant that was at the guns, and just he and I and the driver, who was an artillery mechanic. But when we got overseas, they gave us a small truck because we were going to have to haul so much equipment. And when we got off the LST, we started driving towards Germany, and the driver drove as long as he could, and they said, I can't drive any longer, and the lieutenant says, can you drive this truck? And I said no. I didn't know how to double clutch or anything, and so he and I switched helmets. I put on his helmet with the silver bar, and we finished driving across France to Germany, and at every intersection, the MP saluted me, and I returned the salute. And then right near the Belgian-German line, actually in Germany, we replaced the 2nd Division, man for man and foxhole for foxhole, and we wanted to change our gun position, but they said no, I think they might have even just changed guns, howitzers. Didn't even change howitzers. They just say they're in here, and of course, Bedcheck Charlie flew over every night. He knew exactly where all those guns were.
And who's that? Just for
Bedcheck Charlie.
Yeah.
Their spotter plane would just fly over, and
the Germans.
Yes. Of course, we went over, and it was all secret, and even in our training, we trained like we were going to the South Pacific.
Oh.
So nobody would know where our division was supposed to be going. And when we got over there, they dropped leaflets that said, welcome 106th Division. And of course, we thought they came barreling through there when the bulge started, because we were such a green division. But the thing had been under plans for months and months, and they came right down the same place that they did in 1940 and 1918 and maybe for 14, and they just came right through all the time. And the division was spread over about 25 miles of mountainous territory, and because it was supposed to be a real quiet place to rest and everything. And we were only there a week or so when the bulge finally really started. And we didn't know we knew there was shelling the night before, but we were in sort of dugouts that we had inherited from the 2nd Division. And we didn't know there was an actual breakthrough till there was tanks firing directly on our howitzers. And we scrambled, and I went back with Major Goldstein and some other guys to try to find a place to withdraw to. And I think out of the 12 howitzers that belonged to the battalion, only 3 got out of their positions. That the Germans were there so fast and I always said, where was the infantry? We were supposed to have the infantry out there, but they were spread so thin that they just come roaring through too. They were surrounded, and we pulled back in first position. We thought we'd set up. A Burke gun started shooting all around us, and so this group that I was with, we left there and went on farther back. And they supposedly supposed to have a great distance between vehicles when they're on the road. But this was the biggest, maddest scramble you've ever seen. It was anti-aircraft guns, bumper to bumper, with tanks and artillery and everything trying to get back, and the roads were jammed. And pretty soon some tanks were coming. Our tanks were coming up, and they couldn't get any place because the roads were full of us guys going back.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain place, our officers decided this was a good intersection that was going to be important to stop here and defend this intersection. And officers, as our trucks came by, they said, you go this way and you go this way. Well, I was with the group that stayed at the intersection, and the rest of the battalion went back and reformed and went into battle later. But we started digging foxholes and setting up our 3 howitzers, and pretty soon a few tanks came in and parked behind us, and then some half-tracks with multiple machine guns saw us sitting there, and they pulled up beside us, and pretty soon we had a pretty good protection at this crossroads. And then the Germans finally found us, and we held them back for several days. And they were shelling quite heavily, and the 82nd, part of the 82nd Division came through, and we were very green and very young.
How old were you?
I was about 20, I guess, then. And the whole division was, I think it was the youngest division in the Army, and also had the highest IQ of any division in the Army. But just after we came off Tennessee maneuvers, and we started backtracking here.
It's okay.
But, we were a really hot outfit, and they set up problems in maneuvers in Tennessee where maybe 2 divisions were supposed to chase the 106. Well, it didn't work that way. We some way outfought them and everything, and we were really good. They should have sent us over then. Instead of that, they sent us to Indiana and gutted the division for about a third of the troops, sent them over as replacements, mostly privates and PFCs. And then they refilled the whole division with guys that these ASTP programs that they were busting up. And so we were getting well-educated guys, but they were electricians or fancy radio men or something, and they just did nothing about carrying a rifle or digging a hole. And anyway, we defended this place for a while, and then when the 82nd sent a few guys in, we thought, man, we're saved, because these guys had the hand grenades hanging from their collar and everything, and He said, well, this one night this guy said he'd go out and see if there's any Germans out there. And he came back and said, no, there's no Germans out there. I think he just went around the corner of the building, and because we knew there were Germans out there because they would, and it was snow on the ground. It was foggy in the morning. We could hear that the Germans would be walking towards us. We could hear them before we could see them. And we chased them back into the woods several days, and finally this 82nd Division was supposed to replace us, and we were supposed to be sent back, and they guys that took over our foxholes, and the Germans started dropping so many mortars on us that the guys in the foxholes came into this rock barn we were in, and we had to go back out to the foxholes. And then that delayed us going back, and we were supposed to go back that day. And so they said, well, it's getting dark now, we'll go back tomorrow. Well, tomorrow when it got daylight, this whole field ahead of us was full of tanks. And we were in this rock barn, and most of the guys that were going out the back door were getting machine guns. So you either had your chance of getting machine gun or going out the front door of the barn facing these tanks. And that's what we did. We destroyed our weapons and walked out with our hands in the air, and the advancing troops took our watches and money and whatever else we had. Except I could see what they were doing, so I hid a gold ring I had, which I was glad, because a couple of weeks later I traded that gold ring for a piece of bread about 3-inch square. And then we POWs and lived the life of POWs. Am I still talking?
Yeah. Okay. So you came out with your hands up, and then did they take you? Where did they take you next then? After that?
I think the first night we just marched us back in the open. I don't think we went anywhere. And the next night they had us in a schoolhouse in Alfinger, Luxembourg, and some townspeople brought in some potatoes and a piece of bacon for each of us. And that night was Christmas Eve. We were singing Silent Night, and on the other side of the wall the Germans were singing Silent Night in German. And then next they marched a bunch of us to Gerolstein, a little town in the valley that had a pretty important highway and railroad going through it. And they had a little factory there, like a 2-story factory, and they put about 200 of us in there, and we were the work gang for this town. And I had a buck sergeant then, and I don't think they were supposed to work non-coms, but that didn't mean anything at this camp. This camp, sometimes they would bring us some soup, and we think it was made out of turnip tops, and we didn't always get soup, and we didn't always get bread, but they sort of put us in groups of 10, and they'd give everybody a little loaf of bread that made out of sawdust, and we'd divide that up 10 ways, and we were there was no heat in the building, and I had left my overcoat frozen somewhere in the house, and all I had on was a jacket that I found from somebody in the 2nd Division had left, and it was much too large for me, and somebody told me the Germans hated the 2nd Division, so I took the patch off the arm in a hurry. And anyway, there was no heat, very little food, nothing. And the Americans would come over, or the British, and drop a bomb on the railroad, or drop a bomb behind a house and throw it over the highway, and then we'd have to go out sometimes at daytime and sometimes at night and clear the roads and the railroads. And I was there for 5 weeks. And when we were out working in the daytime and they bombed, the guards would run and hide. And we would go into somebody's house looking for something to eat because we were really starving. And I remember one time I found a big jar of preserves, strawberry preserves. And I was eating that strawberries as fast as I could go and then holding it in my arm like this. And then for the rest of the time I had a big red stain down where the strawberries had gone. And one time I found a pair of socks, and I knew that my socks had holes in them already because I hadn't had my shoes off in 2 months. And one day I found a blue plaid overcoat. It was much too large for me, but it was a beautiful coat. It had 14 pockets in it. And that was my home because I had no blankets, no overcoat, and I lived in that blue coat for till spring. Because I never in a heated room from I guess the time the battle started until 1st of May, and I just lived in that overcoat. And we finally they started moving us sometimes by railroad, and the cars that were jammed together, and they were very terrible. And sometimes you might be in them several days, and as I say, there's no heat, but you had all these bodies in there, but there was never room to sit down or lay down. I had a friend there from the headquarters battery that he'd loaned me $10 once to buy a piece of bread, and it was so tight and so miserable. I tried to kill him one day sitting beside me, but I was too weak to hurt him. And they would start moving us when I guess the Americans would get this close to us. They'd move us somewhere, and the Russians would come this way, and they kept moving us farther north. And we finally ended up between Bremen and Hamburg. And we were there when we moved into a nice camp, and there had been Canadian and English officers in this camp before we got there, and they had been there so many years that they could write home and get whatever they wanted from their family, and they had tuxedos and jockey outfits and everything you could think of, and in their school books they were finishing their college education while they were there, and when they had to leave, they didn't know that there was a bunch of starving people coming in behind them. And whatever food they couldn't carry, they punched holes in it and threw it in a pond that was man-made in front of the barracks there. I guess they did it for fire protection. And then we did start getting Red Cross parcels there, I think, because the war only lasted a couple more weeks after that. And I guess they thought they better start being nice to us. And then the battle got close to us, and I think they said the Germans wanted the English, it was coming, they wanted them to have a truce, but the English knew that they just wanted time to pull back, so for about 3 days and nights they fired over the compound we were in, screaming memes and everything they had going back and forth. And finally the Germans left, and we were released by the Welsh Guard. And the Welsh Guard trucked us up to an airport and flew us into Belgium. And there they washed us and sprayed us and gave us a complete English uniform and fed us for a couple of weeks. And then they took us down to Camp Lucky Strike. where we waited in line for a boat to come home.
Now, what's Camp Lucky Strike?
Camp Lucky Strike was at Le Havre, and it was a huge tent city. And it was there, I guess, from the first landing and everything. And it's big enough at the harbor that they could bring ships in. And when we went over, we went on I think it was called the Manhattan, and it was a regular luxury cruiser, and it only took us about 4.5 days to go over. We went all by ourselves. We were so fast that they weren't afraid of submarines or anything. But coming back, we went on a little freighter that just sort of bobbed along in the water. It took 2 weeks to get home, but we didn't mind because they had something for us to read, which we hadn't had, and they were feeding us when we were at I guess most people were at Lucky Strike for a couple of weeks, and everything was chicken or beef or anything you wanted, and it was all pulverized. And I think they weren't putting salt or something in the food because they thought it would be bad for our stomachs. And Eisenhower came one day, and they asked what he could do for them, and they said, put salt in the food. So from then on, they started putting salt in the food. And at this Camp Lucky Strike, there were Red Cross or somebody had eggnog place. And we were all had been starving, most of us. Some guys were in camps where they got Red Cross parcels from day one and warm barracks and everything. And some of us were treated like animals. But anyway, they had this eggnog, and the line would be about a block long to go get a glass of eggnog. And I was in this line, and when Eisenhower pulled up across the street, and I'd only had to walk a couple 100 feet over to see him, and I didn't get out of the line to go see him. I stayed in the eggnog line. One of those things you kick yourself later,
Yeah. Well, you have priorities.
Yeah. And I wrote to my folks, and they heard from me. I was captured the 23rd of December, and they knew I was missing in action, but they didn't know that I was alive until on Mother's Day. They had a little German postcard that came into the Alton post office, and the guy there knew what it was and that I was missing. So he called my folks and told them on Mother's Day that this postcard was there, and they went down and got the things saying I'm alive and I'm well and not wounded or anything. Anyway, when they met me at the train in Upper Alton, they expected a skeleton to get off the thing, which I was at one time. But I ate so much at Camp Lucky Strike, and then 2 weeks coming home, and by the time they fed me in New York and everything, and got home, I looked like I gained 20 pounds more than I did when I went in there. I was all puffed out and like this. So.
Did you ever think, looking back, that you were in the middle of something so historic?
Not till just lately, I guess. Guys didn't talk much about it.
No.
And now you can hardly get them to stop. Yeah, I didn't think too much about it. Not really, I guess.
Okay.
I like history and all that, but I didn't.
But you were in the thick of it.
Yeah. And when we got back to Camp Shanks, one of my best friends was from Bronx, New York, and I called him, and he came and got me, and I got a pass, and he took me back to the Bronx, and we were going off fighting war again. He was went in the same time I did, and we went all through training together, and then he signed up for one of these programs, ASTP programs, and left And then when they started breaking them up again, he just happened to, the group he was in, they sent him back to the 106 to fill in again. And he was over in the infantry, and he said, no, this is my outfit, and I'm in the artillery, so they sent him back over. Anyway, he was at the forward observer, and he was captured several days before I was. And we were sitting there discussing the battle and everything, and his mother said, just couldn't stand it any longer. She came, stuck her head in the door and said, I'm sorry, boys, but you're both wrong. You know, all we could see was what was right here. And she had been following the war and all the magazines and clippings and newspapers, and so she filled us in on what was going on, you know.
She cleared up the fog of war then.
Yeah, and he moved later to Florida, and he was still single, and he was a volunteer at the Veterans Hospital there, and he died here just last year.
Yeah, you guys did something for us. I'll tell you that.
Yes, when I got this book together, and I said, whatever Strohmeyer says is okay with me. Well, this is Strohmeyer.
Okay.
And he was also captured, and with the name Strohmeyer, and a big, tall, nice-looking guy. Well, the Germans knew he was German with the name Strohmeyer.
Bernard C. Strohmeyer.
And they gave him a hard time. They tried to talk him into joining the German army, and he kept saying no, 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 no. And they finally about stripped all his clothes off and made him stand out in the snow for a long time, and he.
Brave man.
Yeah, he wouldn't give in, and then I saw him in prison camp one time, and he was just real starry-eyed and everything. And then I think I wrote to him or something, and then I finally got to a convention that he was at the convention, and I asked him, I said, did you have trouble, you know, because he was just, a lot of guys broke up, cracked down or cracked up or something. And he said, yeah, he had troubles, and I think when he got discharged, he was in the hospital for 6 months or so before he got to go home. Some of them cracked up the first day of the Bulge. One of my favorite sergeants cracked up like that. He was head of a gun section, and whenever I was a radio operator for the executive officer and sometimes a captain, and whenever they'd let me turn my radio off, well, I'd go on maneuvers or whatever every day somewhere. I had to dig a hole. I'd go help this gun section dig in their gun, which by the time you dig a hole big enough just for the howitzer to stick out, it had to be a pretty big hole. And this sergeant, in the first day the tanks fired on our guns, well, he cracked up. And the guy I shared the foxhole with was a switchboard operator. And we started to dig foxholes, and we were sharing one of these little bitty spades trying to dig a hole in the ice and snow, and he wouldn't even get out of the hole when it was my turn to dig. And I found out that he had cracked up too, and spent the rest of his time in the hospital. So some of these guys I still see in reunions. This guy flew
Carl Scott.
He flew our Piper Cub. You know, each battalion had a couple of airplanes, and this guy was an officer in the reunion in our division.
John Schaffner. Okay. All right.
There's one little guy. Am I still talking?
Go ahead.
They had a breakthrough. We didn't know it was a breakthrough yet. We were down in the valley here, and there's a road up here, and then the A battery was down here. And up on top of the road was headquarters battery. And my captain down here knew that the guy up here they had a, I can't think what it's called. Henry he had electricity. He had light bulbs. They had light bulbs up here.
Okay.
And he wanted one in his dugout. So he had me get a couple of linemen, and we run a line through the snow up to headquarters. And while they were hooking it up so he'd have a light in his dugout down here, somebody was shelling A battery down here, down here. And a couple of guys in a machine gun nest here at headquarters said, serves them right, they had a light on down there. And pretty soon a couple of guys run up the hill and back down again. And I didn't realize at the time what it was, but when I got to this reunion and was talking to a guy named John Gatens, well, he was the gunner on A Battery's gun down here. And he said there was a tank on top of the hill here. It came up, and there were two guys walking down the hill. And he was going to shoot directly on them. Just lay without anybody telling him, just like a rifle shooting straight at him. But these two guys walking down the hill were in his way. and he and a gunner, I think, ran up the hill and told these guys to lay down. They laid down, and then he came back and he knocked the tank out. And nobody would ever believe that. And when I saw him at his reunion, I said, well, I saw you run up the hill and everything, and boy, was he tickled to death. I think I don't know where that stuff went. Oh, it's in here somewhere. There's a thank you note from that guy. And he said, usually when somebody does him a favor, he just calls him up, but he just wrote me got a card and wrote, thank you. He finally had a witness, and he just knocked that tank